Great, hopefully everyone's managed to join now. Really warm welcome to everyone to this ERA4TB webinar. I'm going to be chairing the webinar today. My name's Catherine Cresswell. I'm a scientific advisor at the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence in the UK, also known as NICE. NICE is one of ERA4TB's 30 research partners, and we're really delighted to be hosting this webinar today on behalf of ERA4TB and on the eve of World TB Day 2023. If you haven't come across World TB Day before, it's an annual event held on the 24th of March, and it's designed to really build public awareness that tuberculosis remains an epidemic in much of the world today. So a really important event, and we're really pleased to be marking the occasion with this webinar. This is the second in ERA4TB's new webinar series, exploring key topics in tuberculosis and antimicrobial research. And we're really thrilled to be co-hosting and organising today's webinar with our fellow TB research consortium, Untitled. And I'll talk a little bit more about the projects and their focus shortly. So our topic today is community involvement and engagement in early stage TB research. And just before we get onto that, I'm just going to cover a few housekeeping points. So if we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So today's session is being recorded. We're using the Zoom webinar format, so if you're joining us as an audience member, you won't be on screen. We've just got our presenters here today. However, if you do pop a question in the Q&A with your name, we may read that out when we do the Q&A later. So just be aware that for the recording. We'll be making the recording link available on the NICE YouTube channel and the ERA4TB social media channels after the event. So look out for that, and please do share it with anyone who you think might be interested in watching who wasn't able to join today. We're really encouraging audience participation today. So as I mentioned, there's a Q&A function. There should be a Q&A button either at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on your device. So as we go through our discussions today, please do post questions for our speakers about the topics that you're hearing, about anything that's of interest, and we'll try and get to some of those towards the end of the session. And as well as posting questions, we're also encouraging people to follow the webinar and post about it on social media. And if you do so, please tag us in using the hashtags on the screen so we can follow along with the discussions. We've included all the details of ERA4TB's Twitter, LinkedIn and website on the slide here. And you can sign up for ERA4TB's biannual newsletter via the news section of the ERA4TB website. So just before we move on and I introduce our great lineup of speakers today, I just wanted to give a very brief overview of the two projects I mentioned, so ERA4TB and Untitled, just in case you're a little bit less familiar, and specifically wanted to just explain how they fit within the drug development journey, because we're talking about the early stages of drug development today. So if we could just move on to the next slide. Perfect. So ERA4TB and Untitled are both what's known as public-private partnerships. They're funded by the European Commission's Innovative Medicines Initiative, the IMI, and they bring together academic, public and industrial partners. And as you can see on the slide here, they both focus on slightly different parts of this drug discovery journey. And so ERA4TB is really focused on these early preclinical stages, and it's designed to create an open, European open platform to accelerate the development of new treatment regimens for tuberculosis. We started in 2020 with a 6-year project, so we've just celebrated our halfway mark. And we're really focusing on the sort of research that's done in cells, known as in vitro research, and in animal models, known as in vivo research, but we run all the way up to the first in human clinical trials, phase 1 research. And then Untitled focuses on these later stages, what's known as sort of phase 2A, phase 2B/C research. And this is really what we call clinical research, so research being done in humans. And Untitled aims to set a new standard for anti-TB regimen development by upgrading current clinical trial methodology and enhancing the efficiency with which new regimes are delivered, Unite4TB has the goal of delivering novel phase 2 clinical trials that will accelerate the development of new TB drugs and regimens. So hopefully you can see how the two projects sort of complement each other, but are distinct. And as I mentioned, we're really focusing today on these kind of preclinical, these early stages, and how can we involve people more in that sort of research. And then one final intro point before we move to our speakers. So on to the next slide. Just wanted to touch briefly on the definition of research involvement. So often we hear this term, but just to say it's not talking about getting people to take part in a trial. What we're really talking about here is making sure research is done collaboratively with people, and it's done with or by people, rather than research being something that's done to people. And involvement in research has become quite a common practice, but it tends to focus on these more clinical research stages. So today we want to look at how we can increase involvement in early stage research. So moving on to the important part of today, our fantastic speakers. I'm delighted to welcome Patrick Agbasi, Santiago Ramon Garcia and Derek Stewart, who will be taking part in a panel discussion. We were also hoping to have Blessy Kumar with us. Unfortunately, she's been taken with very important World TB Day activities in India, so she can't join us today, but we wish her all the best in those activities, and hopefully they're going really well. But I really want to start today hearing from probably the most important person in all of this. TB research is all done to benefit people affected by TB. So I'd like to give a warm welcome to Sile Mbopa. Sile is a TB survivor and activist from South Africa, and she's going to speak to us today about her experiences of having TB and her hopes for future TB treatments. So over to you, Sile.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Like Catherine said, my name is Sile Mbopa. I am from South Africa. And in 2020, I had MDR-TB, that is multi-drug resistant TB. I got the TB from my twin brother, my late twin brother. He had TB in late 2019. When I came back from school, I was in university at another town. So when I came back from school for the December holidays, I came back home, he was ill, and then he was in and out of hospital from November up until January, and they couldn't see what was exactly wrong with him. They only said he had TB, the normal TB. And then 3 days before he passed, they found out that it was actually MDR-TB. So meaning the treatment he was on wasn't actually working on him. So 3 weeks after the funeral, I discovered that I also had the MDR-TB because I fell ill. And then I immediately started on treatment in February 2020. And the journey hasn't been nice. It was not nice. I had I reacted extremely to the treatment. The side effects were not pleasant. So I couldn't walk for 2 months. Every joint in my body was painful. I couldn't sit, I couldn't walk, and my skin complexion changed. I became darker. My eyes became a little bit yellowish. Yeah, it was not pleasant. And even now, after 2 years after finishing the treatment, my skin hasn't really recovered from what happened to it. So it hasn't been a nice journey. And my hopes for the future treatment is that if they could develop treatment that is much, I don't know, that is much gentle to people. I mean, what happened to my skin? Because what I noticed that the treatment was too harsh and my skin became too soft. And when I went out to the sun, because 2020 was a COVID year, so I was inside the whole year from February till September. When I came outside, that's when I got in the sun, and then my skin started to turn dark. So if they would develop treatment that is much kinder to the skin, or I don't know what's happening because I'm not a doctor. And then if they would make treatment that is I don't know how would I put it, but if there would be fewer pills, because I was taking 23 pills per day. So yeah, if they would try to improve that, because I feel like that I feel that makes people default on treatment, because there are people that just stop taking treatment as soon as they see that they are better now. Because after 3 months after taking the treatment, you do get better, you do gain weight. So some people just stop taking the treatment. So if they would, I don't know, maybe 5 pills or something, I don't know, but yeah, just make it much better. Yeah, that's my future hopes. Yeah. So yeah, I'll give it over to Catherine.
Thank you so much, Sile. It's so important to hear, I think, what it's actually like to experience it, because it can, I think, especially we're talking about these early stages of research and people doing that, and it can often be quite removed, I think, from the human experience and what it's actually like to have it and to kind of experience it, and your experiences and your kind of what you want for new drug treatments is so important as well, because it's really kind of it's really what we should be sort of looking at and thinking about. And I don't know if you can say also a little bit, like how long did you have to take treatments for? I know you mentioned that a little bit, because I think that's another thing. It can often be quite a long treatment course, can't it?
Yeah, I actually took the treatment from February until December, so it was 10 months. I took it for exactly 10 months.
So 10 months. And did you say it was how many? 23 tablets, did you say?
Yeah, 23 tablets. But they reduced it as time went by. I think in July I took 16 after July. Yeah.
Still a lot though for 10 months.
It was a lot. And there were some pills that I felt sick after taking them. Yeah.
Exactly. I think it's so important. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experiences. And I know you're going to stay on, and if anyone has any questions for you, they can put it in the Q&A, and please obviously do join in with our panel discussion as well. So thank you so much.
Okay then.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again, Sile. So just moving on to our other speakers, I've already mentioned Patrick, Santi and Derek, but let me just give a little bit of background to our speakers before I invite them to speak. So first of all, Patrick Agbasi. So Patrick's a global health specialist with experience working on diverse health topics, including tuberculosis, for management consultancies and NGOs in Africa. He is the chair of the Global Tuberculosis Community Advisory Board, a member of the Untitled Community Advisory Group, and a member of the COVID-19 Task Force for the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire, the Ivory Coast. Patrick has a doctorate degree in pharmacy, a master's in health economics, and a master's in development practice. So welcome, Patrick. Really great to have you with us today. Then I'd also like to welcome Dr. Santiago Ramon Garcia. So Santi leads our in vitro work package within ERA4TB. He's also an investigator at ARE, so that's the Aragonese Foundation for Research and Development at the University of Zaragoza in Spain. He co-leads the antimicrobial D2AMR group at the Department of Microbiology at the University of Zaragoza. And he has more than 15 years experience in TB research, working in both academia and industry, where he's acquired a thorough knowledge on antimicrobial resistance and the process of discovery and developing antimicrobial drugs and combination therapies. And this covers sort of that preclinical research, so basic science, all the way through to translational research. And Dr. Ramon Garcia is also the coordinator of the largest clinical trial aimed at improving Buruli ulcer treatment, which is a multi-country trial in West Africa. So welcome, Santi. And finally, Derek. So Derek Stewart. Derek is a patient advocate from the UK. He's a former teacher who was treated successfully for throat cancer in 1995. And since then, Derek's been actively involved with helping patient experience be a driving force in all aspects of health research, including methodologies to improve relevance, outcomes, and impact. And Derek, you've recently been involved with a review of the UK Medical Research Council's patient involvement work. And so the Medical Research Council focuses on preclinical and non-clinical research, much of which is laboratory-based, so just really relevant for today's discussion on these early phases of research. So a huge welcome to all three of you. It's great to have you with us today. So kicking off the discussion, perhaps Santi, can I start with you? As a researcher, could you just tell me a little bit about what early phase research involves and perhaps how that differs to the clinical research you're involved with?
Hi, Kat. Yes, thank you for inviting me to this webinar. Before starting, I would like actually to thank Silly for telling us about her disease and all the process and all what she actually experienced and suffered. I think this is very valuable, and it's a lot of courage for you to come here in this forum actually to share your experience. So I think it's the general feeling of all the people in this forum, and I would like to really thank you for your intervention and for telling us about your experience with tuberculosis. And then talking about, so here I'm representing the very earliest stages of developing a new drug. I think that situations like this one, in which we are able to speak to people like Silly, are very important for basic scientists. So it's not actually what we can give to the patient, to the TB patients and people suffering from TB, but actually what they can give to us. In the sense that normally, I mean, in my own experience, it passed almost a decade until I was able to personally visit and meet with people suffering from TB. Until that time, I'm from Spain. In Spain, it's a low incidence country, so we don't get to see this very often. And also, as a basic scientist, you are too much focused on your little project, right? On your little protein or molecule or drug and etc. And we might not have the long run scope on all this journey, which is actually to improve the treatment. I was very shocked from what Silly was telling, that 9 months of treatment with all the side effects, and this is actually hard to bear on. And if I can give you a little bit of hope, Silly, is that from the ERA4TB and Untitled consortiums and from many other organizations in the world, we are actually working hard and trying to identify how we can make better treatments and shorter treatments in combination. So you don't have to be 10 months taking a pill, and it could be 4, 3, maybe a month, who knows. So as I said, for a basic scientist, I think it's very important to meet people like you, because you give us a reason and a view and a scope to keep working on this.
Thanks so much, Santi. And I think that's so, that's so useful, I think, for everyone to understand. And, you can actually go years working as a researcher on a topic and never meet somebody who's affected by the condition. I know, Stile, when we spoke, and I told this to you, I think it was quite shocking to you, wasn't it? It was, yeah. To sort of hear that, you can be a researcher on something, and especially when, like Santi, you said, you're based in Europe, and the TB burden is often a lot lower in Europe than it is in other countries around the world. And so these sort of early phases of research, you can be quite detached from people and the people who are being directly affected, can't you? So it's so important. And would you say, from your experience, Santi, is that quite common for people to not have met somebody perhaps who've been affected?
Actually, this morning I was doing kind of a small quiz with the people in the lab, and actually, yes, that's quite common, at least in our environment working in Spain. In my case, it was for me, the first time I was on a trip. I went to South Africa, and it was of my interest, actually. I wanted to meet with people suffering with TB, and to actually see what is the reality in that context that is very different from the one that is in here. But I would say that from a Spanish background and more or less European background, it's quite common that people are working on a project on a protein or something, and they never have the chance to actually interact with the real world out there.
Yeah. Thanks,
so actually, in that sense, one thing that ERA4TB and Unite4TB really also provides is this, I mean, you saw it very nicely from the very early discovery all the way to phase 2 clinical trials. So having this projection and this view in the long run is something that ERA4TB and Unite4TB are also providing, I think is very valuable for all the investigators working on TB.
Fantastic. Thanks, Santi. I think it's really important to kind of hear that researcher perspective. And I guess briefly as well, what would you say are some of the challenges? You know, you've touched on kind of coming from Spain and it perhaps being a low incidence country for TB, but are there any other challenges you've come across to kind of involving people in research?
I mean, this also depends on what you are doing. We need to differentiate between what is basic research with translational research or operational research. And the different background, I mean, you can end up working on TB with a background as a biochemist, background as a pharmacologist, a medical doctor. So there are many different ways in which you can get involved in TB research. But depending your background, you're going to have easier access or not to this interaction. For example, if you're an MD, a medical doctor, and you start working on clinical trials, obviously you're going to have more access to this reality than if you are a biochemist and you are studying how a certain compound is actually binding to a certain protein that you are all the time in your lab. So it comes a little bit with the background of the people, but obviously as well with your interest. In my case, I came from a very basic background and my interests slowly have been evolved to other grounds.
So it sounds like the more we can do to provide opportunities for people to, you know, who are working in much more sort of basic research.
Yes, as I said, this type of project consortiums, ERA4TB, Unite4TB, are providing that view, so that you see more than what you are doing in the short term. But being part of this consortium is giving you the full prospect of what can be done, and then in the end, it's up to the individual to try to look for that interaction. Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you, Santi. So Patrick, can I bring you into the discussion? So I've mentioned sort of you do lots and lots of things. You're a member of the Unite4TB Community Advisory Group. So it sounds like you're actively trying to support TB research, perhaps in those later phases, the more clinical research. So perhaps could you tell me a little bit about that work? So what you're currently doing to support sort of involvement in research, and perhaps why it might be harder for people to get involved at the earlier stages from your point of view.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, but first, before responding to the question, like Santi, I want to thank Chile, because she was able to explain the condition that she faced. I would say that in a community-friendly world, so she didn't mention pill burden, but she mentioned the number of tablets like she had to take. She also described the toxicity relating to the skin. So yeah, thank you for your presentation. And then in terms of my involvement, first I will start on the Unite4TB. So I'm a member of the Unite4TB Community Advisory Group. And then within that group, what we do with the other members is really to provide advice and expertise to the consortium on all the different activities that involve the communities and then the TB survivors. So for instance, through protocol review, we had to help the researchers to understand the perspective of the people affected by TB and provide feedback on the research design to make it more people-centric. And in terms of what I can say about the involvement of people affected by TB in the early state of research, I would say that it is very important. It is very important because you see, as with Zile, the way that she was able to explain her condition, like if she was interacting with a researcher, it is the same way that the researcher should have to make him or herself easily understood by the community. So it is important to avoid the people affected by TB at the early stage because they bring a unique perspective to the research process. so they can provide valuable insight into the challenges and priorities of living with TB, which can help researchers develop more relevant and people-centered research questions. So it is really important. And in addition to that, early involvement can also help to build the trust and facilitate the engagement between the researchers and the community. So this is why it is very important, to have people be involved at a very early stage of the research process.
Thanks, Patrick. I think that it's so important. I know that obviously you're based in the Ivory Coast. I think you do a lot of work sort of in your local community and nationally. And Santi was talking about obviously being based more in Europe. So do you think that it's important to involve people from across the world in research? Is that a kind of priority?
Yeah, I would say both. It is important to involve people from across the world, but it is also very important to have a local connection. That means that we'll take advantage of the global knowledge to make it consistent with the local context. So I will say that, I would say both. As it's important to have people involved from the global perspective, but then it is really important to create this local connection by engaging with local patient organizations or local community advisory boards, all of that.
Fantastic. I think that's a really important sort of point for people working to consider. It's making sure that you're connecting with the right people, and making sure that you're speaking with people at different levels. You can go sort of internationally, but nationally and also local, and really understanding the kind of needs of the people who are affected. So Derek, can I invite you to join as well? And obviously you've been involved in sort of driving patient involvement or community involvement for a long time now. So why do you think it's important for people to be involved in early stage research?
Thanks very much. For those people who are listening for the first time, my voice just goes up and down a bit, so bear with me. Just listening to Zile talk was just, you listen and you go, why wouldn't researchers want to hear that knowledge, those insights, those experience? As Patrick says, that's what can help drive good research. As Santi said, that when he first met somebody, how that changes the way he works. But we're speaking today to some people who are enlightened, who are already thinking about this and doing it. Zile, what you're doing is starting to change the world of research and the culture of research. Because for many people like Santi and Patrick, the idea is just look at the molecules, just look at the laboratory bench. The idea of meeting somebody is often out with their knowledge or their experience. So what we have to define is ways in which people like you, Zile, and others have those opportunities to come in and chat. And when we did the review in the United Kingdom, the biggest thing we noticed was it's about a culture. What the organization like the Medical Research Council and others were doing is looking, what's good science? What makes good science? Let's look at the agenda. What should we fund? Rather than, is it good science and will it make a difference to people's lives? And ultimately, that's what we should be doing. So I'm not going to talk for too long because you can come back in the panel. But I'm using Twitter to put the report out and some other things that people might like to look at. So I'll stop there for the moment, but that's why I'm here.
Thanks, Derek. I think it'd be great to hear a bit more about the results, but just before we do that, I'll just go back, Patrick. One thing that I sort of have recently come across, and I think you're probably much more involved in, is a language guide by the Stop TB, and it's basically sort of how the kind of language we should be using when we're speaking to people affected by TB. And I think one thing that really struck me was that something as simple as the language you use could actually be quite powerful in changing, you know, making research more inclusive and inviting. And something that I learned, because you know, I have a background in what we would call patient involvement, but actually we don't tend to use the word patient, do we, when we're talking about people affected by TB? So could you tell me a little bit about that, and perhaps why we don't use that word, and perhaps a little bit more about sort of how language matters?
Yeah, no, thank you, Kat. So I'll start by saying, like, the Stop TB World Vital Language Guide is really a valuable resource to provide guidance on using language that is first respectful and inclusive when speaking about TB and people affected by TB. And then when it comes to the use of the word patient, it can create a power dynamic between the researcher and the patient affected by TB, where the person can be seen like as a passive recipient of care rather than an active participant in the research process. We prefer people to be active in the process, instead of just being like receiving. And then also, people-centered language helps to reduce stigma and discrimination against people affected by TB. So instead of patients, and for instance, for Zile, she's a TB survivor. So when you say TB survivor, it is like empowering the community and emphasize their agency in the research process. Instead of just being like a patient, we have like people affected by TB or TB survivors. So yeah, that's what I can share about it.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. I think that's really interesting. You know, it's because it's so easy to sort of say the word patient, and you know, I think in other conditions it's quite common to use that. And so actually it's a really simple thing I think we can do as a research community, is to kind of just step back and think about our language, and you know, are we empowering people, or are we kind of, like you said, you know, making it seem like it's something that's being done to people? And I don't know, Celia, how do you feel about that kind of you know, the term TB survivor? And you because we spoke, didn't we, and you said I'm a TB survivor and I'm an activist, and actually, do you find that more empowering than kind of the term patient? Or Celia, I don't know if you're still. I know there's some issues with the power in South Africa. You're just on mute. I don't know if we can. I'll just give it a minute.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, perfect.
Yeah, okay. I heard about that term, I think 2 years back, yeah, after I finished the treatment. And yeah, for me that was nice to be a survivor. I was like, oh yeah, I actually did survive this. So yeah, it's nice, it's empowering. Yeah,
and it's great to hear. And I just think it's something that's quite simple that we can do as a research community to kind of just, you know, make sure that we're being empowering, and we're not emphasizing stigma. I think that's something about TB that you know, maybe not everyone in the audience knows, but there is a lot of stigma attached to TB. I don't know, Patrick, if you wanted just to talk a little bit about that, you know, what the experiences are, or Stile as well, if you wanted to speak about kind of what, you know, for perhaps people who don't know much about it, what stigma is like attached to TB. No, it's okay if you don't want to speak about that, but
No, I would say that I say stigma and discrimination, like for people living with TB, I would say like it is context dependent, but people are really like facing it. For instance, they can be seen as so sick that people won't accommodate to stay with them. And then that's why it is important, starting by the language use, to really break this kind of thinking, but talking about survivor, and then having really like people-centered language that can really address this issue.
Yes, Santi, please come in.
I would like to say that actually using the word survivor is very important. 10 years ago, you know, when a bit earlier, when you have the outbreak of the XDR-TB, that it was kind of a death sentence, and everyone was associating XDR-TB with death. And now we have new treatments that can treat XDR-TB almost as effectively as drug-susceptible TB. So bringing that concept that I mean, you can get cured from TB and you're a survivor, especially in certain contexts, is really important so people to actually reduce stigma. In the sense that, oh, you have TB, you're gonna die. No, that's not true. You have TB, you get appropriate treatment, you're gonna get cured. And that also maybe Silly can speak better on her experience, but how she lived also with her family and with the community, your disease with TB. I don't know, maybe if you want to talk about that, Silly.
We'll just give it a moment. I know there's a slight delay on Sile's line.
In the meantime, what I'm trying to say is that it's really important that we change the narrative, and especially for the society, that there is a change in perception that with appropriate treatment, you can get cured. And Silly is the example
Can you
that
hear me now?
this is true.
Yes, we can hear you now, Sile.
Okay. You were asking, can you please repeat the question?
So I was asking how your family, your close community actually lived this moment with you, and how they support you, and if it was difficult for you in the community or not, having MDR TB. And talking that using the word survivor is really important also to transmit to the society, the community, that this is a curable disease.
Okay, in the society where I live in, the word MDR-TB is like death or something big. And for me, since my twin brother passed from the MDR, so everyone just assumed, oh no, she has it, it's MDR, so maybe the whole family has it, or she'll die. So it was something like that. There was so much stigma around that word. But I know that if you do say I have TB, the normal TB, people will be like, oh, okay, you'll be fine, you'll be cured. But when you say, no, it's MDR, they're like, oh, no, it's that big TB. Yeah, they actually say it's a big TB. Yeah, so people are afraid of MDR and XDR. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's just interesting that there's sort of the different perceptions that people have. And I think just for anyone on the line who's, I think XDR, and Santi, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's extremely drug resistant. So you sort of have multiple drug resistant MDR and you have extremely drug resistant. So, you know, there are forms of TB that just, you know, are much more difficult to treat because they don't respond to some of the kind of the treatments that are available.
Yeah.
And Stila, I've seen we've had a question from an audience member. First of all, they wanted to thank you so much for sharing your story, but they wanted just to know whether you had suitable information to help you understand what treatment would be like, and perhaps also what the side effects and outcomes were like. And if not, what might have helped you made that process better if you weren't given the information that you needed?
Actually, I was never given the information from the clinic. I think I knew from other people's personal experiences, because in South Africa, TB is very popular or common, should I say. So yeah, I knew that it might change the complexion, and I never knew about about how it affects my joints, my bones, or my eyes. Yeah, but I did know about the complexion. So for that, I was actually waiting for that until it happened in September after 7 months. So yeah, but for the other stuff, they only told me when I started complaining that there's something wrong with my joints or my eyes. I think they're yellowish or something. They're like, oh no, actually it's the treatment. So I think I had to cope with that myself. Yeah, I never really got any help from the clinics or anywhere. Yeah, I just had to deal with that myself and continue taking the treatment regardless of the side effects.
And what would there have been anything that do you think would have helped? Like, you know, where would you have liked to have got that information? Would you have liked to have got it from the doctors, or, you know, would you like to have been able to have it as like reading material or on the internet? You know, is there anything, what would you have liked to have supported you?
I think if they do, maybe explain to the person that, okay, you're going to take this treatment, it's going to do it might do A, B, C, and D, or maybe differs from person to person. But if they do explain that to a person, or maybe they are not explaining it because they don't want to scare the person. Yeah, I don't know. But I feel like if I was told, okay, this might happen, but don't worry, after a few months, you'll be fine. This is important. It's important that you take the treatment, but for the first 3 months or so, you might be having problems with your bones and your eyes. Yeah, but it will be fine. I think if they do explain those things. Yeah.
Thank you, and so much. Thanks for the question, and please do feel free to post more questions in the Q&A if you want to. But thanks, Sile. I think it's important. And I guess just quickly, Santi, I mean, I personally didn't realise the extent of the symptoms. You know, you hear about TB being a respiratory condition and affecting, you know, the lungs, and I had no idea sort of it, you know, would affect your joints and your eyes and your skin complexion. And you know, again, do you think that's something that researchers are aware of?
It's not the TB that affects those things. Sorry, it's not the TB, the treatment that affects those things. So I was fine. Yeah, I was fine. I mean, I walked to the clinic to test for TB because I suspected that I might have TB. So yeah. So after taking the treatment, that's only then when I felt sick. So it's the treatment that made me sick more than the TB itself. The TB didn't have the time to make me sick. It was too early. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, drugs typically have a different type of side effects. And I think this communication with people that is taking actually the drugs is important, especially from the very beginning. When you are trying to develop a new drug, you have to be very aware of the potential side effects that every drug might have. And we have in vitro and preclinical assays that can forecast all these things that are going to happen in the clinic when a person is taking the drugs. For example, it's important to know what they are able. I mean, Silly was telling about 9 months taking drugs, etc. Then you have a question, for example, you might have a drug that could be teratogenic. So that means that it's making a damage to the potential baby. And in that case, maybe the person should be taking anticonceptives at the same time of the drug. And it's important for us investigators, for example, to actually discuss with the local people if that is acceptable. If someone living in those communities, they are willing to be having those precautions or doing something in exchange of having a drug that could be potentially harmful to a potential future baby. Those are type of questions that you can actually, you need to actually really question very early in the development process, because then it's a very long way with a lot of investment as well that you need to look at this. Sometimes, as a good friend always says, is that sometimes we do what we can instead of what we should. And what we should is sometimes more complicated than what we can. But because we are in a large TB community, all together, we need to think of what is more appropriate. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Santi. I think that's really poignant, isn't it? You know, we do what we can rather than what we should. Sometimes you take the easiest path. We all do it. We always take the easy path rather than kind of thinking, oh no, I really need to do what I need to do what I should be kind of really digging into what's important to people, and you know, not just about the treatment itself, but all the side effects it will have. So we've had another question come in from the audience. Celia, it's to you again, and they were interested to know what does it mean for you or for people affected by TB to be involved in the earlier stages of research, you know, to be able to have a say perhaps in how drugs are designed and developed. Okay, I see you've got your iPhone's going to die. Then I know there's an issue with electricity.
Yeah, but I can answer this.
Perfect.
Still have a bit of okay. For me, it's very important. I mean, I'm excited that I get to help the other person who's taking, who's gonna take the medication maybe in the next 2 years or so. So yeah, it's really nice. It's healing me emotionally. So yeah.
That's fantastic. I mean, it's amazing that you're able to do that, and you're able to, you know, use your experience for something really, really positive, and like you said, hopefully help sort of future generation of people who are affected by TB. So yeah, well, if your phone cuts off, just to say a massive thank you for taking part today and for sharing your views. I think everyone's been so, you know, found it so useful and so relevant, and so just a huge thank you.
Okay.
So we have a few minutes left. So Derek, perhaps I can come back to you, and perhaps would you be able to give us a few kind of either some examples or perhaps some practical tips for researchers who might want to involve people in earlier stages of research? Or you're just on mute, Derek.
Okay, I'll do a couple. I think the first thing to say is we're not going to be doing the research. That's your job, right? But it's only by having a conversation with a lab researcher that I fully realize how many failures you have, how many times you try something and it doesn't work. I read a newspaper and it tells me there's a new drug, and it's not until I read it fully I realize it's in a laboratory. It may take 10, 20 years for it to come. So if I don't have those conversations with you, Patrick said it's about coming out and just going and talking to a support group, because we don't see you. You're behind the scenes. If we hear what you're doing. So I met a clinician doing work on, who's an academic doing work in a laboratory as well. He's doing work which will take skin tissue out before you have treatment and then put it back. It will make not a blind bit of difference to me. But wow, to understand what you do, just have those conversations. Don't try and put somebody onto a committee. Don't set up an advisory group. Just go out and talk to people. And then come back in, and then come back out and talk to us again. But when you're writing something that's to go for a grant, if you come and talk to us, we might change the language and make it a bit more user-friendly. And the likelihood is you might get it through approvals, might get it funded better than if you hadn't come to us in the first place. And I think that kind of moral compass. So just conversations. It can be over a coffee and then build it up. But it's mutual. It's what we both gain from it. Does that help?
Yeah, thanks, Derek. I think it does. I think it's important to sort of hear, you know, why should we be going out? Actually, the fact that we don't need to, like you said, create all these new structures, just go and have the conversations and go and listen to people. And I think that's really important as well. You don't always have to kind of, you know, create a brand new group. You can just go and speak to people directly. So that's really useful. Thank you. Oh, Santi, come on.
I would like to make a comment on what Derek said about the you read news in the newspaper and you see that there is a new drug and etc. And I think people working on communication on the outlets media, and investigators as well, we have a responsibility of transmitting reality, not hope.
Yes.
Sometimes it seems that yes, and I fully agree with you there. And this is something I really dislike a lot when you see this headline in a newspaper saying the new cure for whatever. Okay, you need to really tell the context and explain people that is a potential cure if after 5-10 years all these things are happening. And if there is willingness in the society, it's not just about research, it's also about the general community, policymakers, a lot of people that are involved in that these molecules are finally converted into a drug that is taken by a person. So it's more having these conversations is important, and we have to be careful with how we transmit what we do. Yeah, I fully agree with you, Derek, on that.
Thanks.
There's a group in Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which has damaged a lot, killed a lot of people. And some of the scientists there, if they're going on TV or going to talk to a reporter, they go and talk to the families first. Because actually what it does is it makes sure that the language they're speaking in talks to the public. It also explains so that those families also hear what's going to happen before it gets released. So I think there's lots of benefits for both sides.
Thanks, Derek. Patrick, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just maybe want to add one comment about facilitating the engagement of TB-affected community in research. One thing that I want to say is that sometimes researchers are lucky to interact with research literate organizations, but very often we don't have this luxury. And then what I want to add here is that we researchers should not shy away from capacitating the community. Like there is the possibility of building capacities. When I'm saying like Zile, for instance, it is possible to train Zile so that you would be fully engaged in the research discussion. So it is really like in an area where there seems not to have like any capacity, it is important. And I think this fall on the researchers to really build the capacity within the communities in order to facilitate their interactions.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. I think that's a really important sort of point, you know, actually building capacity to sort of talk about research can be done, you know, but it ultimately it's probably better coming from people within the community and people like Zile who can speak not only about the research but her own experiences, and you know, it's a sort of really knowledgeable place to come from. We've had another question, so I just wanted to touch on that, and this is probably to anyone. Is anyone aware of any policy measures in place to incentivize the further involvement of communities in research decision making? So not only just the sort of research subjects or participants, but sort of anything that's sort of, I guess, helping to incentivize involvement of people in research decision making. And if not, do you think that the policy sector should be looking more at community engagement, and so not just investing in sort of research and development, but I guess also investing in making sure people are involved in that research as well? So I'm not aware of any, but Patrick, over to you.
Yeah, no, I would say that I'm not aware about any policy measures to incentivize involvement of communities, but then there are initiatives coming from diverse organizations that aim to capacitate the community in order to facilitate the engagement in the research process. So yeah, for instance, the Smart 4TB that is just being launched is really like about capacitating the community, also to take part in the research process. And then I think even within the Unite4TB, the fact that we have a community advisory group, it is also to allow for facilitating the engagement and to put the interest of the community first within the research process. So I don't know, maybe like what others think about the policy involvement in asset advising, but the one thing that is good is that there are this type of initiatives that are being taken by research organizations or other global organizations in order to facilitate the engagement of communities.
Thanks, Patrick.
I mean, what I can say about this is that, for example, in the European funding scheme, ERA4TB, Unite4TB, for example, you need to have the involvement of organizations representing patients of the different type of diseases, in this case, tuberculosis. And this is something that is important to get them involved from the very beginning. Also, I think advocacy is an important part because I mean, we can build or create or develop the best drug in the world that is going to cure TB. But if people cannot take it, then it's useless. So access to medicines is a key discussion point in here. And in the end, I mean, researchers, we can actually work towards this objective of access to medicines, but in the end, sometimes it gets difficult. And patient societies, they actually can advocate and can lobby and put pressure to these things so everyone can get access to the medicines that they deserve. And for example, you know that every year there is this conference, it's called the Union, the International Union for Lung Disease. And more and more, we are seeing that advocate organizations are actually lobbying it in these conferences to request fair access to medicines. So this is also a very important part that I think patient organizations can actually be involved in dealing with policymakers and stakeholders.
Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, Derek, please come in as well.
So from a United Kingdom perspective, we have funded and supported the involvement of patient service users, communities for a number of years now. When we look at the millions of pounds we invest in research, it's only a small sum of money that goes to paying a meeting room, helping a support group to meet, bringing people together so that funds and supports that work. And I think we're increasingly seeing it in Ireland, in Canada, and certainly in Australia. So there's a move towards this being policy to involve people. So I think we're beginning to see it just roll out across a number of nations.
Thanks, Derek. I think, yeah, really important sort of that, you know, it's progressing a lot in some places, perhaps less in others, but I think it's something that, again, as a research community, we can kind of push it forward and not sort of wait till it's an expectation from a funder, but sort of be trying to make sure it's something that we all have as a kind of high priority. Well, we've come to the end of the hour, so I'll just wrap up by saying a huge thank you to all the speakers today. Santi, Patrick, Derek. Sile's had dropped off. Don't know that there's load shedding issues with electricity supply in South Africa, so she's gone. But massive thank you to all of you for your input today. It's been a really fantastic discussion. Also a huge thank you to my colleagues at Unite4TB and the European Lung Foundation who've helped put this together, and Emma, Magda, Lauren and Carla who are on the line, and my support team at NICE who've been making sure everything went smoothly today. So as I said, the recording will be put up on the NICE YouTube channel and the ERA4TB social media channels. That will probably happen in about a week. We just make sure that we have a correct transcript to go alongside the video. And we are planning our next ERA4TB webinar, which should take place in June this year, and we'll be releasing the topic soon. So check our Twitter feed for more information on that. But thank you everyone and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you, everyone.
No, thank you. Great.